Japan simply doesn't love you anymore. At least that's what Western game developers are learning as layoffs take hold in the Western gaming industry from a lot of Eastern game developers. I'm talking about Sony, I'm talking about Square Enix, I'm talking about a multitude of other developers that are realizing, hey, these Western game developers absolutely do not have any idea of what they're doing and are kind of alienating the fan base. This is what we've been seeing with so much titles coming out that have been developed by Western studios, where they have an alienating tactic of developing games that simply do not entice the gamers to actually invest into those games. And I think what we've been seeing from a lot of developers, specifically at Sony, makes it clear and actually obvious that it is the best course of action to avoid Western game developers, and this seems to be the modus operandi of the modern day Japanese and Eastern gaming sphere, where they're simply holding up their hands and saying, oh yeah, you guys are kind of a net negative to our development process and we're gonna have to leave you behind. And this is a hard case and a hard-learned effort for Square Enix as they realize, hey, we have to lay off everyone in the Western gaming world and we gotta focus within to actually release content that is valuable, because the most valuable content is coming from game developers in the Eastern world. I'm talking about Japan, China, Korea, and so much others that actually are the predominant money-making machines in the gaming industry nowadays. And it seems like a lot of companies that are in Japan are realizing this is the case, and they're purging their ranks of Western game developers, Western marketers, and Western community managers. And this is what we saw with Square Enix just recently, where they're purging a lot of Western businesses and they are focusing on cutting off a lot of the access that a lot of Western game developers have to their money and funding. And I think this is the thing that we've been hearing from so much developers, but Square Enix in particular is making this case because they've lost a lot in this process of trying to appeal to the Western game developer mindset. And the Western game developer mindset is an unprofitable mindset if you don't know. What is the Western game developer mindset? That is just focusing on things that have nothing to do with the gaming world in general. It's more focused on bringing about an idea to the forefront of the gaming audience, trying to have that idea ingratiated with the gamers and for them to accept it. And that's why we have these more overt political actions that are at the focus of a lot of video games coming out nowadays. And you can see with the many failures that have preoccupied a lot of Western game developers, where they're losing out in massive fan bases because they want to bring in ideas that have nothing to do with the gaming audience interests or just the fun of playing video games. And I think that's the thing that we often see with this modern age of game developing, where gaming narratives that have nothing to do with the games themselves are at the focus, while gamers are losing out on their interest of actually enjoying the game that has come out. And I think that's the thing we saw with so much titles in 2024. We saw with Concord, Flintlock, Kill the Justice League, Star Wars Outlaws, Assassin's Creed Shadows, Dragon Age Veilguard. So much titles were preoccupied with this notion that they have to develop games for an audience of people that simply do not want to play games. And I think this overt focus on political action rather than actually making something that looks good, it kind of destroying the graphical looks of these games that were once cherished and looked amazing. You kind of downgraded to make it look more in line with your political stances. That is the thing that we've been seeing all throughout gaming. Of course, this was pushed by characters and organizations like Sweet Baby Inc. These are the Western gatekeepers for the gaming audience nowadays, where a lot of these developers have to pass through their system to actually get a game to have the proper support from gaming journalists. And that's what we see used as threats from Sweet Baby Inc., where they're threatening marketing teams saying, hey, we're going to have you inundated with terrible articles about your video game if you do not take our services. And this is something we saw happen with Black Myth Wukong, where it was allegedly extorted for over $7 million from DEI consultants. And they rejected this offer, and subsequently they had 10 articles a month coming out talking about how terrible the game is and how you shouldn't buy it and how it's racist and sexist and it's all these other things. Of course, this game went on to have success, but this is just the way gaming is nowadays. If you do not bow to this mob of people, they will attack and destroy your game through media. And the things that they want to see reflected in these games are the things that they want to see reflected in the political environment in society. And that's what we see kind of having a stranglehold on the Western gaming sphere. But this bit of influence was non-existent outside of the Western gaming sphere, where you can look at the games that did not follow this trend and just made their own proper games in the Eastern gaming world, they made hundreds of millions and billions of dollars. And you can just look at Black Myth Wukong, the company that rejected that offer, making hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars. You can see this with so much other titles beyond that. And I think that's reflective of what's happening in the gaming industry, where the Eastern games developers are realizing we do not need the Western games development sphere. They don't even understand their own audience, so why are we going to go to them for support? And specifically for Square Enix, they saw the worst of this with Forspoken, where they opened up a studio, Luminous Studios, and it went bankrupt over this terrible game that was filled with the modern day messaging that you obviously see backed by consultancy firms. And I think this is the result that we saw with other studios within the Embracer group that tried to produce a modern day Saints Row with all the DEI messaging that you always see within the gaming environment. And this is the sort of baseless and useless content that we usually see being produced by these studios. We even have Chinese gaming studios closing down their studios in America and Canada over the terrible content that has been coming out from them. You hear from NetEase shutting down Bad Brain Game Studios, and it's just reflective of what we've been seeing in the gaming environment for these past few years, where a lot of Eastern developers are just pulling away from Western game developers because they're not producing profitable content. And it makes sense specifically for Sony and for other companies that have lost epically by going after this messaging. You can see this with Concord. It cost over $400 million. The game itself barely got 690 players on Steam. It didn't really get the reception it wanted from the gaming audience. It subsequently had to shut down because of that lack of audience. When you look at the game itself, it has all the characteristics that you would see from a game that was there for messaging purposes rather than actually being a game that was supposed to be fun. And I think that's the thing that we always see with this modern day updating of gaming, where gaming is more focused on actually bringing about a modern day progressive ideology to the forefront rather than just being something that is enjoyable to play. And I think this is the quintessential failure that we've been seeing in Concord Firewalk Studios that is still somewhat alive, even though they fired a lot of people from it. It just shows that Sony is looking at the situation. They're trying to hold fast to these ideals, but it's getting harder and harder to do that when failure is associated with so much of these gaming properties. I mean, just look at the current day Sony, where they're looking at their current slate of properties. They're thinking, hey, we got to shift away from Western studios. They really don't know how to make a game for the gaming audience. You can see this with the failure of Ghost of Yotei. Ghost of Yotei was supposed to double, triple the earnings of Ghost of Tsushima, and it's simply not doing that, specifically outside of America, where the sales are collapsing and selling half of what Ghost of Tsushima has sold. When we see this game kind of underselling what Ghost of Tsushima has been selling, it's not going to be a complete failure, but it's just not a success story where it was making actually more money than the previous game. I think that is the failure that we're seeing at the face of this situation, where gamers are just rejecting anything with a messaging at its forefront. And that's why this has become a problem for Sony, where they're looking at Western studios and just kind of looking at the slate of developers that are just not producing anything of quality. Naughty Dog, Sucker Punch, Ben, Guerrilla, they just have not produced the content up to par with their other studios in Japan. And it's bringing a review of the situation where Sony's considering, hey, a lot of these people are antagonizing the fan. They hate the fan base. They're talking about how they want to see people killed in the fan base. It's just not the optics that they want to see. And I think it makes sense for a lot of companies to pull away from Western gaming. And that's why Square Enix saying, hey, we're going to fire a bunch of people. We're going to actually pull away from Western studios. It's the obvious choice. And the people that they chose to fire were the primary conduits for this rage against the gamers. You see mostly community managers, marketing managers, HR staff, people that have rallied against gamers, and they're supposed to be out there promoting the game to gamers. They've lost their jobs. It's kind of reflective of a gaming industry that is disconnected from the people that are actually out there to play video games. And I think them taking this stance and actually going after the people that created a toxic environment for the gamers. You can see some of these people saying, hey, I want to make sure the game has everything you hate in the game. So of course you're going to fire these people. And I think this is just so reflective of what the gaming industry has turned into, where you have people that are more messaging tools that are out there for hatred of the gamers rather than actually making content good for gamers. You can see this with Ghost of Yotei actress Atsu. She's just a representation icon. And this is a developer in the West that is picking things based on their ideology to be inside a video game. So they're choosing actors, they're choosing voice actors, they're choosing talent, director, writers that are in line with their personal ideology rather than actually having the talent to actually produce something that is up to par and up to snuff with the quality of the previous iteration of the game. And I think when you have rooms being chosen based on gender, racial identities, you're going to fail to produce something that is just based on gameplay and fun. And I think that's what we see with a lot of the studios, where they're always taking pictures saying, hey, look how much women we have. I'm like, okay, how fun is the game? That's what all we want to know. But that's just showing that the perspective and what they are focused on is not the gameplay or just gaming in general. They're more focused on virtue signaling. And I think gamers are noticing that's the case. And that's why so much poor quality games have been coming out these past few years. And it makes sense that firing a lot of these people that are producing bad games is definitely the right course of action. And I think that is the love affair between America and the East kind of breaking up right now. And it seems like it's happening on all levels, politically, economically, but even game-wise, we're seeing that breakup happen. And I think a lot of gamers are cheering for it because we're just tired of playing terrible games. And that is the situation a lot of gamers are dealing with. But you tell me what you think about the situation. West and East, Japan and the Western world are breaking up, and a lot of gamers are happy. And I can't blame them. It's a divorce waiting to happen because gamers are just not getting what they want. That's just my 2 cents on the situation. You tell me what you think. Like, comment, share, subscribe. This is Wagner Knows Why. Catch you next time.